Despite some progress at the nuclear talks with Iran in Geneva, America's relations with Tehran remain in a so-called, quote, state of emergency. The Obama administration has renewed its sanctions regime, first imposed nearly 3 decades ago after the Iranian Islamic Revolution. RT's Marina Portnaya reports.
U.S. President Barack Obama says it's necessary for the 30-plus year state of national emergency against Iran to continue due to the fact that relations between Washington and Tehran have not returned to normal. Ironically, the move comes as the international community continues taking significant steps to broker a deal over Iran's disputed nuclear program. Now, although last week's marathon ministerial talks in Geneva ended without a deal, ongoing negotiations between Iran and Western powers have been praised as constructive and comprehensive, with discussions scheduled to continue next week. Now, the biggest obstacle to a breakthrough has been America's ally, Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been publicly skeptical and fiercely opposed to easing sanctions against Tehran until or unless its nuclear program is completely dismantled. Now, U.S. lawmakers have promised to wait for a briefing by Secretary of State John Kerry this week before deciding whether to impose tough new sanctions on Iran. But in the meantime, pro-Israel groups have reportedly been ramping up lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill, pushing for more punitive measures. Now, some experts speculate that Obama's ongoing state of emergency against Iran has more to do with appeasing Israel. Reporting from New York, Marina Portnaya, RT.
And earlier, my colleague Matt Trezor talked to Soraya Sepahpour-Ulrich, an expert on Iran and a U.S. foreign policy analyst. She believes that there was no will at all from America in the first place to put an end to the nuclear stalemate with Iran.
Mr. Obama is sending a very clear message to Tehran that whatever agreement it does make with Iran in the future, it cannot be trusted as it was not trusted in the past. I don't believe for a moment that from the onset there was any desire to reach a deal, or the whole of the negotiations were just a marvelous piece of theatrics.
Listen to Jay Carney here. We're going to run a grab from him where he talks about Washington's stance toward Tehran.
The American people justifiably and understandably prefer a peaceful solution that prevents Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. The American people do not want a march to war.
What do you think Carney was addressing there? What side was that statement aimed toward?
The United States foreign policy has always been about influencing the public opinion, the domestic public opinion, so that they could push their foreign policy agenda. And this is exactly what it is. Mr. Carney is addressing the American people. He's not saying this to the Iranians. He's telling the Americans we don't want war.
Thank you. And along with Israel, there's been another diplomatic roadblock in Geneva, though it was laid out by France. The country's foreign minister opposed a potential agreement, calling the draft deal, quote, a fool's game. International affairs columnist at The Guardian newspaper, Jonathan Steele, explained why he thinks Paris is getting so tough.
France has convinced itself that Iran is meddling in a region which was traditionally, at least in colonial times, under French influence. I mean, Syria and Lebanon. And they feel they took a very hawkish line against Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, when the uprising began 2 years ago. They thought he would be toppled quickly, and they feel that it's really thanks to Russia diplomatically and Iran militarily that Assad is still there. And they feel very annoyed and angry over that. And the second reason, I think, is quite simply money. They see that Saudi Arabia is also having a row with the United States, partly over Iran, but partly over other issues. And they feel that they can get their foot in the arms sales door and take over as one of the major arms suppliers to Saudi Arabia, which, of course, is a hugely lucrative market.